Hi there, welcome back to the Board Game Specialists. I'm Carla,
And I'm Melanie.
and today we are talking about our top 9 route building games. But before we get into that, Melanie, what have you been playing?
Well, so we had a game day. Actually, you were there.
Yeah.
I finally, I'm switching jobs. So I was having a work transition celebration, and whenever I celebrate anything at all, what better way than with a game day? So I think it was like, what, 6 of us? So
Yeah, it was
yeah,
perfect.
so it worked out well. We could do some games all of us together, and then we broke down into 2 teams, and then we played a few. And one of the ones that really stood out from that day is we played Destinies, me, you, and Kayla. And I'm so impressed. Like, I've had this game on my shelf for a long time. It's one that I know I wanted to play. And when I looked into it, it looked amazing. It has a similar mechanism from the Chronicles of Crime, where you're scanning cars as you kind of progress through the stories, but it's not cooperative. We each had our own agenda. And you have your destinies that you're trying to fulfill, and there's 2 different ways that you can do it. And you're interacting with the characters you're coming across, and you can ask them about your destinies, or you can try to help them out, or like there's different things that was happening, and it was very interactive. And one of the things I like with it, because it is an app-driven game, and the thing that can happen with app-driven game is you have one person that kind of runs the whole thing, and then the other ones are just kind of like passengers, so they're not getting the full effect of the game. But with this one, the phone gets passed around on your turn, because some of the information the other players may not get to see. So it was really hands-on for everybody. Somebody had commented, because I had shared pictures, and it's like there's no voice acting. You read yourself, but you know what? I enjoyed that as well. Like, it kind of keeps you engaged and into the story as you're reading it yourself to everybody else on your turn. And it was neat, like, because it was a bit like a dungeon crawl, because you started with the one tile. The other tiles that are there are face down until you go and explore them. They would come face up, and then the app would tell you, oh, this character is there, so you would put like this little mini over there, and you were like, oh, and there's these things you can interact with, so you would put these tokens so that you can interact with. And there'd be different challenges, I guess, that you would call them, that you were doing, where you'd have to show that you're trying to open something, so you'd have to do a strength test. And you have the 2 main dice that we all had, and then you have like these assisting dice that you can you would get 1 every turn unless you had an item that would allow you to get more. And then you can roll all of that, and depending on the number that you got, it would be anywhere from like I think the chart went from like, I don't know, 1 to or 2 to 13 or 12 or something. And you have these little tokens on there, and depending on where they're at. So if you rolled an 8, and from the point 8 down to 2, however many token were there is what your success was. And I mean, I was having great rolls, and you and Kayla,
Yes,
not so much.
You were. I didn't even know the dice had a 4 on it. All of a sudden, you rolled 2 4s. I'm like, there's 4s on that dice? I got 1s and 2s mostly.
But as the game progressed, you can kind of improve your skills so that you have more tokens in the lower numbers.
Yeah.
You know what? The whole thing, I was so impressed with. It was so good. And how it all came together. So I'm really excited about that I got this one. I want the expansions now. And I want to keep playing. And it was good. It was so good. And then yesterday, me and Lee ended up playing a quick game together. And actually, it was great, because it would have fit in this week's episode.
Oh, yeah.
But it's Curious Cargo. And it was interesting, because you put like 2 player boards, and then there's a lot of different player boards you can play with, but you pick the same one, and you kind of put it like end to end across from each other. And then you have these tiles that have these conduits or pipes or whatever, and then you're connecting them to your machine, and you're trying to get them to your loading bays on either side, and one's a shipping and one's a receiving. And you like the base game has like 2 type of goods, and it's like we don't really know what it is, but you just bought a factory and you're trying to ship these goods as fast as possible. So, and there's like the blue goopy stuff, or the red electricity kind of stuff. Like, it's just really unclear as to what these curious cargoes are. But you're just trying to create a route that will go from your machine to one of the loading bays. And then you can bring in trucks that'll kind of load along the side. But these trucks, some of the locations are blocked off. So you can only load if you have a route that's connected to the bay while it's next to it. So when you move in, if it's a truck that's 3 tall, then it would take 1, 2, 3, and 4, because you have like the cab and then the three cargo. And if one of those is next to a location that you can load onto, then you would put goods onto it. And then as you get new trucks, it pushes the trucks ahead up until the truck leaves your factory, and then it'll go into the other player's factory. It'll just kind of land there. And then if they have a connection that connects to the bay on their receiving side, then they can get those goods and put them in their receiving portion. It was really interesting. It was neat. I think it was our first time playing. So second time, because I would create these routes and then I would never mess with them at all. But you may have to be more fluid and kind of change them a bit to try to match up to the cargo trucks that you have coming in, so that you can capture a little more than I was kind of worried about getting. So, I mean, at first it felt like I was doing pretty good. I had way more routes than Lee did. But Lee started kind of changing his routes to connect more stuff, so he beat me by over 15 points. But it was good. Curious Cargo was neat. How about you? What have you been playing lately?
Well, I just wanted to touch on that Destinies that you had. We had played some little elimination game. Oh, it was 5 cucumbers, and I was out first, so I'm like, oh, that's totally fine. I'm going to look through games and see what we should maybe play. And I had spotted that one, and I know you had talked about it, and you hadn't played it, and I was like, I think I want to try it. It's not my typical type of game, but because it has a little bit of RPG, so it's kind of the first RPG little game that I've ever played. And just that whole type of game, rolling the dice and, with the tests and everything. And I really liked it. Like, I was surprised how much I liked that game. It was awesome. But played another one there that I had my eye on for a while, but just never bought it. Kind of been always waiting on the used market for it. And that's called Magic Maze.
Oh, yes.
Now, that one was awesome because we played with 6 of us. And I think that's is that the max?
8.
You can play? Oh, you can play
go up to 8.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, right, because there's 8 different things. So what you do in this game, it's you can't talk throughout the game, where there's a lot of grunting and like, because what you're trying to do is get out of this mall. But before you do that, you have to get these colored meeples to their store that they want to buy these weapons because they're going back to the dungeon or something to fight. Yeah. It was the story. So they just all start in the middle, and you start with 1 tile, and then you have to get the same color to the edge of their color of spot in order to add another tile, so to explore. So you need to get maybe not all the tiles, but you need to get all the tiles out that have each color of Meeple's store so that they can buy their weapons. Sometimes we had to use all the tiles to do it.
Yeah.
So you're moving these Meeples around. I don't know what are they actually? They're not Meeples. They're like dwarves and elves and things like that.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, there's tokens, right? But that's what they represent. Yeah.
But in order to do that, everybody has an action tile in front of them, and it's either like move north, south, east, west. You can move up an escalator, down an escalator, or there's these little portals that you can go through. So if I put the orange, like elf or whatever it is, on this portal, and somebody has the portal tile, they can move them to any portal that's out there on that of an orange color. So, but you can't talk. So you're just moving them like simultaneously, like trying to be aware of all 4 of them and where they all need to be moved. And you have this one little red token that you can put in front of someone, meaning you need to do something. and then there's also a person who has to put out the tiles that need to be explored. I feel like that was the hardest job.
Yeah, the last one there for sure.
Yeah, because you have a movement, plus you're the one who puts out the tiles. So people are always sticking that thing in front of you, like, come on. You're looking around. Do I need to move it? Oh no, I need to add another tile here. And you need to do it quick because you also have a timer. So it's quite a long timer, but if that timer ever runs out, you lose. Now, in order to reset the timer, there's little timer spots on some of the tiles that you just can move any one of those, like elves or whatever to. But sometimes you're not looking at the timer. So somebody's like putting this red thing in front of you, like, no, like jumping it up and down. And you're like, what? Everything's moved right. And then all of a sudden you look at the timer and you can see it's like there's like 4 grains of sand left to go through and you like quickly do it. But oh my gosh, it was so fun. And so the first round, all you're doing is just, I think, moving them to the stores and then getting them out. Yeah. And then the next round...
they all have their own exits.
Oh, right. They all have their own exits. Then the third round, every time you flip the timer, you switch your tiles in front of you. So you're doing a different direction. That one, it took us 3 times to get. And then we actually completed it. But it was really fun.
So we reached level 3. And there's 17 level in this game.
Yeah, I said
level 3 took us 3 times, so yeah.
It would be fun to try, like, work through the levels, but not always start back at 1. Right. Like, say, go 1, 2, and then maybe try 3, and then just 4. Like, kind of use it as a campaign type game. But
yeah,
it would be a really good one at the very first game you play at a convention, because your mind is just like, whoa, and just going and just opens everything up. But
it would wake you up really for sure.
Yeah, that was really fun. Another one I got played this past week was Atiwa. Now, this is a new one from Uwe Rosenberg. Oh, and this one is all about bats. And you would think, ooh, like, who wants a game about bats? But it's quite interesting because it's it's quite a learning game, too. It really opens your eyes to what the uses of bats are. And it's based in Ghana. And so apparently, like, people there... Most people believed that bats were evil and they basically brought the devil upon you if you had bats in your house or like in your fields or whatever. But with further research, they figured out that the bats are the ones who are starting all these crops all over because they will eat fruit from the trees and then they will travel a distance and then their excrement will have fruit seeds and they'll be planting new fruit crops all over the place. So until you learned this, you think they're bad and you try to kill them and some of them will eat them. So it's quite interesting because the game is a worker placement game and like his typical kind of farming game, but it's quite different than any of his. So you start with this one tile that has one family on it, and depending on player count, you might get a bat or a fruit or a tree or something. But what you're trying to do is build a bunch of trees up onto your card, and then you're trying to get more settlements and more terrain and more cards that will spread out your farm, I would say. So if you have an untrained family, and at the end of the round, there's 7 rounds, you will hopefully have some trees or fruit and some bats. And every untrained family is going to go into the gold mine and mine for gold. And so you pull out of this bag just some wild tiles that could maybe give you 2 gold or could give you 1 gold or could give you none. But they always cause pollution. So then they take up a spot on one of your boards. And so you can never put something in that spot. If this family is trained, they automatically will give you a gold. So you don't even have to go and mine. Now, the whole theme behind that is you are training families to understand what bats are actually doing, and the ones that are untrained don't know anything about how bats are helpful to you. So that's the kind of theme behind that. But you're trying to build up a whole bunch of trees and bats because after each turn, you have 3 workers that you can do each round. So 3 turns. After each turn, if you have 3 bats on your tile and you have some fruit, your bats will fly away and you will pay your fruit back to your little market board, and then you will get to plant a tree as long as you have a spot for it. So that's why you need to buy more of the bigger tiles to have more room for trees. Now, it's funny because the bottom, there's like settlements and towns and different things, but at the top you can buy terrain. So it might be like a whole tile that's just you can put trees in. There might be a tile that, well, it's funny because you can go to a spot where you just wildly will flip a tile and you're hoping it's like, you want a bunch of trees. Well, I think it was Ashley, she wildly grabbed one and it was a bat cave and it was just for all bats, straight bats, which is helpful too. But when you're looking for trees, it's not helpful. But it's quite a neat puzzle because what you're trying to do is balance the trees, the bats, and then you can also get wild animals and sheep because you have to feed your family at the end of every round too. Of course, any Uwe Rosenberg game. And then there's breeding. And the breeding is different every round. And it shows like in the worker placement spot as you move the tiles each round what the breeding is for that round. So you might get a new family if you have a couple of families. If you have a couple goats, you might get one. If you have a few wild animals and so on. And the neat thing too is the more goats you acquire, you also have goat milk. So that will also feed your family. And that'll come off of the food you need to feed them. So I made the mistake of not getting a whole bunch of animals. So I always had problems feeding my families. I needed to use gold, or you can use fruit. You can, if you have an untrained family, you can use a bat to feed them. But it's quite a little balance that you need to do, because every time you spend something, you have your own market board. So you don't like grab a wild animal from the supply. You grab it from your board and it comes off and it goes onto your little tiles. And then when you spend it, it goes back onto your board. So you're trying to spend all these things on your personal market so that when income time comes, you have all these things that you're going to acquire. But once you spend them, they go back on your board. So it's quite a give and take, but it's really interesting. And it's way lighter than I thought it was. It says advanced on the box. I don't believe it's like a feast for Odin or anything like that. It's definitely, I would say, a medium game. But it's really interesting, and it's really cool how he's going into, how he's trying to like make aware things that are not, most people don't have a clue about. So it was really cool. But yeah, that's my second one, Atiwa.
Nice. At first I thought you were saying Ottawa.
No, Atiwa. I think that's how you say it. It's spelt Atiwa.
Oh, okay.
Atiwa. So I could be.
Atiwa, yeah.
I think that's how you say it. But
that sounds interesting.
Anyway, let's get into our top 9. So how was this list for you? Route building, the first thing you think of is trains, right?
Yeah, you know what? That's totally where my mind went. And then I
have one train game on here, but that's about it.
Yeah, I think I have 3. So I definitely have some train games, but then I've went other ways. There was one that I put on the list, and then I took it off before I got doing my picking, just because, and that's the Transcontinental, because you're building the train track. But is it really route building if everybody's building the same line? So I'm like, well, you kind of build up at and I felt that was stretching the thing a bit, so I took it out before I got my list. So the Transcontinental is not on my list, but
and the main train game. Well, maybe you'll mention it, but I'll mention is not on my list, but it was on my list.
Oh, I see. Sure. Yeah, I think it is on my list if I'm picking up what you're putting down there. All right, well, then let's get started. My number 9 is Terra Mystica. And this one was published in 2012, and it's created by Jens Drogenmuller and Helge Ostertag. And this one, honestly, like the first time I played it, it gave me that this is Catan taken to the next 3 level. It's neat. It's so cool. And then you have all these other things, and then these kind of, I guess, what would you call it? Like your technology that you're upgrading and that sort of stuff. So you have these that you're building. But the map itself is you start in one area and you have to branch out. So you are kind of route building in that way. But what's interesting is depending on the tribe, I guess, that you can live on a specific type of terrain. So if you're going to build up from there, you need to terraform the terrain into what is match for you. So you have to bring the other locations to your terrain before you can build there. And depending on the type of terrain that it is, some of the stuff is fairly close, so it wouldn't take too long, and it would take like one of terraform to kind of make it into your terrain. Some are like, they're very different type of terrain, and it would take a lot more effort to bring it to what you need in order for you to build there and then branch out. I had also played Gaia Project, which is almost the exact same game, but I found the map portion was harder to spread on the Gaia Project than it was on Terra Mystica. And this one, I did. I've really enjoyed it. I need to get this played again. It was so good. It's one that plays a little long, but it's one of those, like, you're playing it a long time, but you don't realize you are. It's kind of like, oh, wow, that was good. Why are my legs numb? You know? So it's so good. And that's my number 9, Terra Mystica.
Yeah, it's a really good one. My number 9 is actually a roll and write, and it's called Trek 12 Himilaya, and it's made in 2020 by Bruno Cathala and Corentin Labret. Now, this one is, it's such a cool game because it comes with a whole little campaign that you can do. There's 3 modes of play. You can do a whole solo campaign, and I think he's got a whole other box. I can't remember if it's like Amazonia or something like that. But before I even talk about this game, and I don't know if it's still on sale, but Board Game Bliss had this game on sale for like $12, and it's nice. A $30 roll and write. Like, it's really cool. But what you're doing is you have 3 different maps in the box. So you can do 3 different, like you can do like a little mini campaign of 3 games, or you could just, do the first one for a while and kind of go on. And they kind of go a little bit up in complexity. But all it has on this little sheet is a bunch of circles that are connected. And what you do is you have 2 dice that you roll, and you can either multiply the dice, you can add the dice together, you can minus 1 dice from the other, you can take the highest dice or the lowest dice, but you're just taking one number, and you're going to put it in one of the circles. So say I take a 6, and whatever I have taken, say it was a multiplier, say it was a 2 and a 3, and I multiplied it, I have to cross off a multiply, what I took. Because in the top of the little player sheet, there's a grid, and you can take 4 of each of the things I described. So like 4 times you can use multiplying, 4 times you can use addition, and so on. So I crossed that off, and I put a 6 on one of the circles. And so the first one you can put anywhere. And then from there, you have to connect from one of the ones you've already had. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to get chains of either like runs. So like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Or you're trying to get a whole bunch of like 6s together or 7s together or 8s. And the unique part about it is at the end, when you score, you always score like your biggest chain. So say I had like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. How you score it is you start with the highest number. So I start at 7, and then I count how many chains I had. So that would be my score for that one. And you get to count all of them, but there's a bonus for your longest chain. And then when you have like, say, clumps of like 6, say I had 4 6s, I would count 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 would be my score for that. So you want to have some real high numbers, and you want to have some long chains. Now, if there's ever a time during the game where you can't put a number that isn't connected to either a chain or a clump, then you get the sad face, and it's worth -3. It sounds like it would be really easy, but it's not, because you start making your chains and all of a sudden you roll something, you're like, I have to stick a 0 somewhere. Where am I going to put a 0? It's going to give me a sad face. And you might have to put it somewhere, but then later on you can connect a 1 to it. So at least you've got 2 points, right? Because you would have a chain of 0, 1, so you'd get a 1, 2. But right. It's really neat. And this one you can play on BGA as well. And it's a perfect one to try out there because it's so simple to play on there. And it's such a simple concept, but it's so neat. And then there's also if you want to play with these little helper cards, if you get a certain thing on your board, like a chain of ones, like 3 ones, then you get to grab one of these cards, and it will give you like something like you can just choose anywhere on the board instead of having to connect, or it'll let you re-roll the dice after everybody's chosen a dice. You can also save these cards for the end of the game, and they'd be worth points if you didn't use them. It's really neat. And how you score it at the end is, if you're doing like a little campaign, you can do trophies. So it depends who's got the highest score will get a trophy. If you beat this minimum score, you'll also get one. And then after the 3 games, whoever has the most trophy wins. Another thing about this game is it has some like envelopes that are not opened, and they won't open unless somebody accomplishes this goal. So one of them might be like, you need a chain of 5 sevens, which is really difficult to do. But if you do, you get to open this envelope, and there might be new cards and might be some new maps. I think I've only opened one of them so far, but it's really neat. And Bruno Cathala, he's just a whiz at all his games. I feel like he's just clever, and he develops all different kinds. But that's my number 9, track 12, Himilaya.
Nice. My number 8 is an oldie. It is not the oldest one on my list, but it's close to it, and that's Carcassonne. I guess every time I think route building, Carcassonne comes to mind. And this is one that I find is a classic game that probably should be like a staple in a board game collection. But it's interesting because you build your map as you play. Now, every player has a limited number of meeples that you would play. So you would add a tile and then kind of add a meeple to the map. Now, if you add a tile that's a city, and you would put your meeple on the city to show that you have like an influence into the city, you're trying to close down the city, and then once you close down the city, that would come back to you. You would put a meeple laying down on a field, and then where that field connects any cities that are completed, it would score, but that meeple's there till the end. You can do monastery where it builds around, but what's the route building is you can build on the roads, and you're trying to create, because you will score 1 point for each tile that creates your road. But if it comes to an end, like to a city or to a fork in the road or an intersection, like it ends the road, and then you got to count that up and it takes your meeple back. So sometimes you're playing trying to close down the other player's roads before it gets too long and they score too much. But by the time you finish, you've got this big kind of countryside with roads going all over, and it just kind of, to me, like when you talk route building, like that comes to mind. And it's, like I said, it's a classic game that every time I play it, I enjoy it. Like, even though it might not always be my number 1 choice to play, but then when it gets to the table, it's like, all right, fine, yeah, let's play Carcassonne. I was like, oh yeah, that is a good one. You know, so that's my number 8, Carcassonne.
Good one. All right, my number 8 is Village Rails, and this one's made in 2022 by Matthew Dunstan and Brett J. Gilbert. Now, this one is just a little card game, and it's a sequel to, and not the same designer, but the same company has kind of produced a couple of these games, and I think they have another one coming too, but it's a sequel to Village Green. So that one, you're having to draw cards from a grid, and this one is similar. Put cards in a grid, but that one was a 3x3, and this is a 4x4. Now, what you're trying to do is make all these different tracks, like routes of train tracks, but how you put the cards, each card will have a route coming out of each side, and it might move a different way. So depending how you place these cards in your grid, you might have a route that comes out like diagonal and then ends up at the bottom, or you might have one that just goes straight to the right and ends up at the end. And each card will have something that it needs. Like, it wants to have different, just want to have all the same terrain. So you might have to try and connect all the same terrain to this one route. But on the other end of the other route that's on there might have like, it might say it just has like a population. So it just has people. So it's kind of hard to explain without showing what this looks like. But it's very interesting because you are drafting cards from a top row. The first one is free, and just like in what's that game called? gems where the first one you take is free, and if not, you have to add one of a dollar, and then the next one is free. But if you don't want that one, you have to add another dollar.
Oh, like
so you have to pay Century. That's what it is. Century Spice. So it's always beneficial to take the free one, but it might not always work in your grid. And you don't have to connect them all. You have to you could put anywhere in your grid because you just finish the game once you have all your 12 cards. So it's actually a 3x4, I believe. And so and once you've completed a route, you score it right away. Now, when you score it, you have these 3 kind of scoring cards in your hand that you can choose for each one. And one of them might give you might have 3 of those things on one of your scoring cards. So you're going to get a whole bunch of money. But one of them, you might just have 1. But you're saving this other one because you know you're going to build this route like perfect for this other scoring card. So you'll put that down. And then another thing you can do is buy these trips up top. And those are other cards that will give you a whole bunch of points for that route if you're doing what it tells you to do. So it's interesting because at the end of each time you draft a card, you can buy a trip, but they're expensive. So you have to make sure you're getting a trip that is going to work for that route. But it doesn't always happen because you have big plans, but then you have to take a card and stick it and ruin some of your routes. So it's really interesting because you always have this perfect plan, like, oh, this one's going to do this, and this one's going here, and this one's going here. And then as soon as you have to draft a card because you have no money left, you have to take that first card and you have to put it somewhere, you could ruin all your routes. So it's quite a lot of planning, and you can never get the perfect one. I mean, I haven't seen it happen. I don't think it's possible because you're either buying trip cards and then you don't have money to spend on the drafting cards, but you want the trip cards because they'll give you big points. And it's just so interesting and neat. And these guys are quite good at route building. I have another one coming up by these 2, but this is my number 8, Village Rails.
Nice. That sounds interesting.
Mm-hmm.
My number 7 is one I've talked about often. I just really enjoy it, and that's Super Motherload. So Super Motherload was created in 2015, and it's created by Gavin Brown and Matt Tolman. And it's... You're digging, like you're mining. And that's what really got me was the first time I played it is there's 2 boards that you have, and it's like the dirt, right? So it's all underground. So you have the first one that's underground, and there's a little bit of stuff in there that you can find, and it's looser dirt, and then but the deeper you go, the more you'll discover, like the more the good stuff you can kind of dig up. But it's a deck building as well, steampunk, steampunk themed. But you have this character now. It's deck building, but you all have your own cards you can build from. So you would just purchase kind of higher quality cards from like the different type of card that's available to you, and then they'll kind of give you different terrain you can dig through, right? Like, so this one will dig through dirt, no problem, but then you need a stronger one to dig through the rock. And like, so the different type of dirt you're digging through, like you might require stronger cards to be able to dig through that. And what's really neat is as you're digging, you would put down these tiles that are like blacked out tiles to show what you've dug. So depending on the card that you played, whether it's like a tiny little square, or maybe it's like a long row passage that you were digging, or maybe it's a bigger square and you were kind of digging a bigger area. So, and you're kind of going down, creating these tunnels as you're digging through down. Now, when you reach the second level of the dirt, so you get into the second board, the first board goes away, and then you get the third board that gets introduced. So your table is never really overrun by all these boards, but you go deeper and deeper in ground, and then the deeper you go, the tougher the material is that you got to dig through, but then the better the resources you can kind of dig up. And it's neat. It's such a fun game. And then the whole thing with the moving tiles that kind of goes deeper and deeper was so interesting. And that's my number 7, Super Motherload.
That's such a good game. I missed that one on my list, but it would have possibly been on here because it's really cool. All right, my number 7 is In the Hall of the Mountain King, made in 2019 by Jay Cormier, Graham Johns. Now this one, it's really neat because you have to build routes you're trying to rebuild this inside the mountain where they have built this like all these shrines and things, and it's collapsed, and now you're rebuilding them, and you have to like dig up some of the statues that you will put onto your tiles, and those will give you big points at the end. But you're also digging up tunnels to get to the middle where the higher point tiles are that you want to build on. And you can play this in a couple different ways. You can play it just competitively. You can play it with teams, which we have done. We've played a 2v2 of this. You can also play it cooperatively. That I think you needed a little expansion for, and I'm not sure how that one works, but it's really neat because your action selection is you are choosing to do something, and when you say you will take a card, you start with this little pyramid of cards, and they have resources on them, and you can take them off anytime you need them, but if you haven't taken them off the cards, and you somehow will get a new card, and then you will place it on the top of what you've built so far of a pyramid, it'll cascade down you'll get to refill your what's ever empty on your cards. Now, if your cards aren't empty, you don't get to refill them. So you have to wisely spend those resources or get them into your main supply off those cards so that you can fill those back up. That is quite tricky, I found. When I had tried, I had just set it up and played it like a two-handed game just to try it out. I had such a hard time trying to build anything, because to use the resources and then to have the space once I get a new card was quite tricky. But once you play it a few times, you kind of get the hang of it. Now, it was really neat when we played a 2v2 because we would all start in different corners, but we were trying to connect our routes, because then we could use our work machines that each other has used. Because typically you can only use your own that is on your own route. Now, what you're also doing is there's these statues all over the board, and if you build on top of them, you basically dig them up and they will land onto your route. And then you want to move them onto these big tiles that will give you big points. The resource management is so cool in this, and I've never seen it before. And I thought it was just the neatest game, and I ended up getting this at KefCon. Mm-hmm. They were, P. Mediway had set up a table, and they had this game there, and I thought, it was like $70, like not that expensive for a Kickstarter version, because I had asked, is that the base game? He said, no, it's the Kickstarter version. I'm like, really? Because I had looked on Boardgame Bliss, it was $120 or $130. I'm like, wow. And he even said right there, he goes, yeah, like Boardgame Bliss has it for this much. And I'm like, you know that? And you still have it listed this low? But he said this is what like the markup is. So that goes to show how some of them, how much they will mark up some of their games.
Yeah.
But their prices are awesome at this P. Mediway. If you ever get a chance in Edmonton, you got to go check the store out. The customer service is awesome too. I know Ashley one time had ordered a game and said, oh, my friend's going to pick it up. And they're like, oh, where does she live? We'll just drop it off for you. Yeah. Like just personal service like that. And she's like,
amazing.
Really?
You're amazing.
You know, I'm not assuming they would do that for everyone, but they just kind of go out of their way, and it's just an awesome store. But this was my game. Sidetrack there. In the Hall of the Mountain came my number 7.
And that's one that I forgot to put on my list because it would have made my top 9, I'm sure. It's such a good game. Yeah. It's interesting. Mm-hmm. All right. My number 6 is the oldest one on my list. And it's another one that I consider a classic that has kind of started the route building, I guess. And that's Catan. Created in 1995 by Klaus Teuber. And, you know, this is all about branching out from your little village and kind of branching out, creating more village, and then upgrading them into cities. I call them settlement. And just to try to access the most resources so that you can develop more. And this is just a satisfying game to play. It's an older one. You like in the gaming community, you'll have a lot of people that are burnt out on it. It says, no, I do not want to play Catan. And every time we play Catan, I like it. Like it's just such a pure, clever game. You roll the dice, and depending on the combination of your dice, so maybe you roll a 3 and I don't know, and a 6, so it's a 9. Then all the 9 location that has a 9 on it activate, and if you have a building or like a settlement or a city that is connected to that, then you get to collect that resource, and you have all these resources in your hand. Then you're like, okay, and then to do another city, you're gonna need what is it, like a sheep and a wheat and a wood and a clay. And I was like, okay, well, if I get all of this, I can do a city. It's like, great, I could do a city. Oh, but you can't do a settlement too close to your other settlements. So it needs to be two-way. No, I need to build more roads first. So then you're kind of branching out, and you can get yourself, or you get stuck if you don't branch out enough, and you get stuck in a corner. That's happened to me before. But it's all about kind of developing your network into this map so that you can access the most resource, so that you can build up more. And then the first person, like, because each settlement will give you a point, each city will give you 2. If you have the longest route, it gives you a bonus 2 points as well. And then the first one to reach 10 points wins the game, right? So it's such a neat, interesting game. My kids like playing this one. It's an easy enough game that it's entry level, but it's complex enough and interesting enough that it'll be, not challenging per se, but it'll keep somebody's interest at any level, right? So that's my number 6, Catan.
Awesome. Yeah, and this one, I know I always complain about the luck of it and the dice rolls, but then if you use some of the expansions, you can mitigate that.
Yeah.
So, because I don't have a lot of luck with the base game, never whatever needs to be rolled for mine never happens, so I'm never getting any of the cards. But there's one, I can't even remember which expansion, and it adds so if you don't get something, you actually get to gather, or I don't know, there's something that helps with that. But so that is a classic for a reason. All right, my number 6 is Clans of Caledonia by Juna Aljuju, made in 2017. Now this one has a similarity to Terra Mystica in the route building part of it. And the reason this is one of my top 20 games, but it's not high up on this list, is because it's just a part of the game is the route building. It's not the main, I wouldn't say the main part of it. It's just part of it, but it's so neat in here because you're trying to build these routes, these shipping routes, but you're also trying to build different ones. So you're not connecting one whole route. You're building a bunch of routes that can be connected through your shipping. So at the end of the game, whoever has the most, and most of these routes that can be connected by shipping, gets a whole bunch of points. And how you're doing that is you can build anything you want. So you have this player board that has cows, sheep, cheese, milk, wheat, bread, and whiskey. And so you are just building different factories or farms. And then you also have a mountaineer, and now I forget what the grass guy is called, but you have 2 different workers that you can build a bunch of them too. And so they will go onto tiles just like any of the other ones, and you can build anything depending on the terrain. But you will need to take some of them back off the board when you need to slaughter a cow or a sheep. And if you do that, then it could disconnect a route. So you have to be very careful how you do that. That's one thing you wouldn't do in Terra Mystica. You don't take anything off.
No.
Is what I remember, right?
Yeah.
But these ones you do. So you could be taking it off, and then it's open to somebody else, and if they build their boom, then you are done. You can't connect that route again. So you have to be very careful how you're building your routes and where you're putting your cows and sheep, because they might have to come off if you need them to fulfill a contract. It's so clever how it works. I played this a lot on BGA as well, and this is one of the only heavier games that I will play on there, which I typically don't like to play heavy games online. It's just too much when I need to, I like to see the whole board in front of me instead of jumping around to different screens. That kind of drives me nuts. But this one, the only board you need to see is basically that one, and then your player board, which you can see in a whole screen, so you don't really have to jump around. But it's such a good game, and he's been teasing about an expansion for years and years and years. It's made in 2017, so that's already 6 years old. So hopefully something's coming out. I don't know what he could do to expand this game because there's a lot going on. There's the route, there's your whole player board where you're trying to build up, and then there's this whole other market thing that you get to manipulate, and it's so cool, but such a good game. That's my number 6, Clans of Caledonia.
Nice. My number 5 is the ultimate route building game that everybody probably knows, and that's Ticket to Ride. So Ticket to Ride was created in 2004 and is created by Alan R. Moon. And this is one that is easy to get to the table. It'll appeal to pretty much everybody. It's just a straightforward game to play. And you have the map. And now there's a lot of different maps that you can play, and there's a lot of different versions. I own the Europe version that introduces the station, so that, because one of the frustration with Ticket to Ride, it could be like, because you have these goals of these cities you're trying to connect a route to, so you'll be like, okay, well, I'm going to build here, so you build your route, and somebody else comes along and they block out the path you're trying to do, and that can be so frustrating. So with the Europe one is you can still build a station instead and kind of take advantage of their route and then kind of go and finish further down the line. But if you're going to be building, and then there's like different, like some cities are closer together, some are further apart, and then the further apart, then you're going to have more cards to build that segment of your train track, and depending on the color of the line, the type of card that you need. So there's some of them that are wild and you can use anywhere, but if it's like the green line, then you're going to need to have, and it's a longer one, so you need 5 green cards in your hand before you can build that particular route. Now every time you complete a route, you'll score points for that, and you kind of keep track and move that along as you play. But then you also have those secret goals that you have, where if you connect from this city to this city all in one line, then you will score a bonus so many points. So you're trying to accomplish that. Nobody knows what your goal is, but it might be obvious with how you're building your route. It's just a satisfying game that's easy to play. It's always pleasant to play, and that's my number 5, Ticket to Ride.
Yeah, I really, really should have included this on my list. The more I think about it, it's a game you can pull out with anyone. And I mean, there's so many different versions, like the maps, and they all have something different on them. And I'm just looking at the one I have in front. Like I have a whole cubicle or a whole like calyx shelf of just the expansions. And my favorite one is the UK. It adds like stocks in it, which is so cool. And then the other version of it, because there's always 2 in a map. There's Pennsylvania. So I think the Pennsylvania adds the stocks, and the UK adds technology, which gives you like different things you can do with each one. Like it's so neat. I really should have added this. So really good choice. But my number 5 is actually a crossover, and that is Carcassonne. And that one I will play anytime with anyone, anywhere. And I have a big map that you can start the game with, and it's like a map of, no, I don't remember which map I got, but it's so cool because it's like this big giant sheet, and so then it has some half cities started on it and has a few roads, so you can, and then there's a starting tile, so you start there, so then you kind of have like a goal to where you want to connect to and stuff, and it's really neat. But I mean, you've said it all. Carcassonne is, I would say, the easiest gateway game. You literally pull out the box and say, okay, we're starting.
It has no setup,
Where's the game board? There's just piles of tiles. You're just going to start with one. And you could even start the game with saying just a few rules. You could say, we're just going to do roads and cities. Like, you don't have to, and then add in monasteries. And then there's so many expansions to this game you can add in. Like, I've tried one. I have a bunch of the expansions. I've tried with all of them at once, and it was quite a bit because you like have the dragon, you got the traders, and you got all this. But it's so fun, and it's such a classic, and I love it. And that's my number 5, Carcassonne.
Nice, good choice.
Yeah.
My number 4 is an economic game, and which is unusual for route building. But this one is Smartphone Inc. It was created in 2018 by Ivan Leshin. And it's a map. So you have a map and you're going to be creating your market because you're selling these smartphones. And what's really interesting is you're picking the price of the phone and you're trying to kind of capture these different markets. So where you kind of set up is where you can sell to. So you want to branch out so that you have a larger market you can sell to. But other people are selling potentially on the similar market as well. So you got to be careful on how you set your price. Because if your phone is too expensive, people are going to buy the cheaper phones first. So the way that you set your price is very important until you increase the technology of your phone. Because if you got the brand new iPhone, people are going to pay to their teeth just to get that one. Doesn't matter. Now you get to set your price and they're going to pay whatever you want just for that technology. So, and it's really interesting. So at the beginning, you have these tiles that you got to try to stack them in certain ways. Just kind of what the icon is showing is what you're going to be doing. And this is high on my list for how much is actually route building. Because, I mean, it's an economic game. It's more about kind of getting access to these phones and selling them and increasing the technology of the phone. But spreading out throughout the map to build your market and kind of spreading that out is a big aspect of it. Because if you don't build your market, you're not going to have access to enough buyers. And it's neat. That's my number 4, Smartphone Inc.
Awesome. My number 4 is Pandemic Iberia, and this was made in 2016 by Matt Leacock and Jesus Torres Castro. Now, this is one of my favorite versions of Pandemic. This one is neat. Instead of curing just like plagues or diseases, you are actually curing like the old like malaria, typhus, and cholera and all those things. But what you're doing, the route building part of it is you have to build these railways so that you can get to these different places, because the only way you can really travel is by railway and by boat. So the boat will only go around like the map. So you have to go to these ports. And the other way is railway, and the only way you can connect to different things is to build more railways. So you have to build these railways. That's one of the actions in this one, whereas typically that's not an action in most of the pandemics. But it's quite neat because you build these railways, and then you also have spots for water that you can like bring water into these different countries. And the thing about the spreading of the disease is a little bit different, whereas people will flock to these hospitals. So you're having to build hospitals, and then the cubes are the people that will flock to the hospitals. And so that can spread the disease as well. And it's quite a unique game of Pandemic, and the board is just gorgeous. The colors in this game are beautiful, and it just looks absolutely neat. But it's quite unique how this one plays out compared to the other pandemics, but it's one of my favorite, and that's Pandemic Iberia.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about that one, but I haven't tried it yet. Yeah, so that sounds neat. My number 3 is Railways of the World, the card game. And it's the card game instead of the board game because I have never played the board game. But after playing the card game version, I really want to. Because this card game version is amazing. And a lot of time the card game version kind of gives you like a glimpse of what the bigger game is. So I am imagining that this Railways of the World, the board game, would be just spectacular. This one was created in 2010, so it's an older game. That's 23 years old. No, 13 years old. Oh, so that's an older game. And it was created by James Etham and Steve Ellis, and it's good. So you have the middle main station, I guess, where you can kind of send all of your trains through. And I'm not sure what that's called, where you kind of sort your trains. But so you have the main station. You're going to be picking up cards a little bit like Ticket to Ride style. So you pick up cards and you have cards of different colored lines. And then some of the cards you're going to pick up are also going to be city cards or stations. Now, stations are going to have different colors associated to it. Sometimes there's multiple colors, sometimes there's only one or whatever. And if you're going to build from like the main area going to this station, then you need to build utilizing the proper colored routes. And you're going to stack them up, and then you're going to put your station there. Now, the station also indicates a number of tokens, and that's how many of the goods are going to go there. And then, so you're going to build your station, you put your goods, and then you can try to move the goods from this location to another station that matches the color of the goods that is on that particular card. So if it's a red good, you're going to try to move that over to a red station. And when you do that, you get to score through for every segment of track that you go through. You're going to score that and then get the good delivered. The goods are going to score at the end too for the different color combination that you've created as well. And then whoever has the most influence going into a station is going to score that station also. So there's a lot of different kind of things going on that will allow you to score. And you have this like little board that has like a track that goes round and round, and you move your train to kind of keep track of your score. And every time you go around, you add one train in the middle that kind of adds all the 50s, right? So you kind of keep going. But it's such a satisfying game to play. And then by the time you get playing, like you have all these routes kind of branching out from the middle and all these stations, and it's quite the map that you're creating as well. And then you can't also deliver goods, like you need to have locomotive that would have been spent in front of you. Now they can be used multiple ways. It could be a while to create a route, or they can be put in front of you, and that's your kind of delivery power. So this is how far you can go from one of your station to another station. So you need to have enough locomotive to be able to reach the next station that needs the yellow goods or whatever colored goods you have to deliver. It's such a neat, satisfying game. Every time I played, I was like, oh yeah, this is good. And then it was always just me and Lee playing it. And then my friend Sasha came over, and then we ended up playing at 4 players, and it was even better. So I just really, really like this game. And that's my number 3, Whaleways of the World.
Oh, I want to play this. That sounds awesome. It'd be good to play before the big game.
Yeah, I want to find that big game if I can. I haven't come across it, but if I do, you know it's coming home.
Awesome. All right, my number 3 is On Tour by Chad Deschamps, made in 2019. This isn't the roll and write, but this is basically route building the game, because you're literally building a route. You are a band and you are touring across the United States. There's also a European map you can play as well. And now they have more expansions. I can't remember the cities they have. But the second Kickstarter was like the European map and the US map. So you're traveling, let's say, across the USA. And you have these big chunky dice, and you roll these dice, and you have 2 numbers on them. So if you have a 2 and a 3, you are going to write something down on 32 and 23. You're going to write those numbers somewhere on your map. And you don't have to like connect everything right at once. You could draw one over in the top right corner. You can put one in the bottom. But you have to eventually connect some sort of route. And you're trying to get the longest, best route possible before the end of the game. So you have all these big plans. So say I had a 23 and a 32, and I put a 23 maybe kind of near the bottom left, and then maybe put the 32. Oh, and the other thing is you have these cards that you can choose which cities to build in. Now, you have to choose one of those cards, so you might not be able to put it wherever you want. You have to choose one of those. So I might choose like the south west to put the 23, and then I might choose the north central to put the 32. And so then you'll write those in the little circles, and if you've placed them in an exact spot that one of the cards had shown, because it'll show an area, but it also shows some exact spots. And so if you show the exact spot, you get to circle it, so that would give you an extra point if that is in your route at the end of the game. Now, it's so tricky because the beginning to the middle of the game is quite easy. You can basically fill in most areas that are still open. But near the end, areas start to get full, and you pull out a card and you're like, I have to put in that area and I'm already full. So now you have to put an X somewhere on your map. So that could screw up a whole route you had planned. So the best way to go about it is to kind of build out from the beginning, and you kind of go on each end and try to build out that way so that you're sure that you have some sort of route. But there are games where you have this huge route built up and you're like, I just need this one and this one to plug in here. And it never happens. You never roll them. And you're like, dang, I screwed everything up. There are times where you can roll if you roll doubles, I believe it is, then you can put a star somewhere, like on one of the terrain cards. Like you can choose one of those and it's a wild, and it can be any number. And those are awesome when that happens, because sometimes you really need to just get a number. Like you need to fill in one of the circles so that your route will connect. But at the end of the game, then once everybody's filled everything in, whether it's stars or X's because you couldn't have gone into the terrain you needed to, then you check where your best route is for your band tour, and you count each one is a single point if you have a circle around it. So meaning if you either had a star or if you've put a number in the exact spot it had showed on the card, you'll get 2 points. Then you add those up, and you can be typically anywhere between in your 20s, 30s. If you have a really bad game, it could be less. If you have a great game, it could be more. But that's typically how it ends. And it's a really cool game. There's like a little app you can play that you can play it in 5 minutes because it does all the work for you. But just even playing it, I've played this solo so many times. I've just sat and just tried to roll dice and tried to build the best route. And you're like, okay, I'm going to do it again. I've got to get better than 25. And then you get a game where you're like 32 and you're like, oh, well, that was easy. I'm going to try again. Then you can never reach that number ever again. And you get frustrated, but it's so addicting, this game. You really have to try it. It's my number 3 on tour.
Nice. Yeah, it's one you've heard of a lot. It's an interesting theme to it. So
yeah.
My number 2 is Ride the Rails. It was created in 2020, and it's produced by John Bower. And now this one's from a trilogy. I know there's one that's Irish Gauge, and there's another one, and I don't remember what the other one is called. This is the only one I've ever played. And the first time I played it online, but I purchased a copy since. And this is a train route building game. So you have the map of the United States, and you're going to be building trains and going from location to location, trying to link things together. And there's different train companies that's going to be building routes. So there'll be different colored lines that gets drawn out, and you don't own any of them except you can buy stocks into it. So as you purchase stock into it, you're going to score more for certain routes if they've connected so many things. So it's like you could be multiple people that have kind of an interest in the same company, and then it's like advantageous to both of you to kind of build it up. But then there's as the game progressed, there's more stock you can buy from like the different ones that become more difficult and rare to build. And then you've kind of run out of the one company's kind of done what it can. So now it's the other companies are taking over and so on. And it was just such an interesting, it's like, I would say it has a strong economic aspect to it as well. And it was just such a neat game to play that, yeah, once I played it online, I was like, okay, I really want to have the tactile experience now and play it on the board, on the table. So I hunted this game down, and it was very neat though. I mean, it's definitely a more complex than a Ticket to Ride or Catan. Like, it has a higher complexity to it. There's more going on that you need to kind of keep in mind. This is definitely an economic game. But it's so good. That's my number 2, Ride the Rails.
Yeah, that one looks really interesting. And they have like a whole series in that line.
Yeah, the Irish Gauge is one, and I don't know what was the third one. Because I think it's a trilogy.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. My number 2 is the Guild of Merchant Explorers. And this was made in 2022 by, again, Matthew Dunstan and Brett J. Gilbert. Now this one, could have been a roll and write, but they made it into a board game. And so what you're doing in this one is you are flipping cards, and whatever the card shows, that is the terrain you get to cover with some cubes. Now, once you've started at a certain point, you have to always connect from there. There's different routes that you can build from each one, but depending on the terrain you decide, you will put cubes down. It might say you can connect 3 of a certain terrain, so you will put those, and then the next one might be a different terrain. You can branch off there if you have some connections. But once you always complete a whole area of that type of terrain, you get to build I can't remember if it's called a city or a settlement, but then that will be like a little house kind of thing that you put down, and then you keep going on. And there's 3 rounds, I believe, and then you have built all these different things up, and then at the end of the round, all the cubes come off the board, but your settlement or cities, whatever they're called, will get to stay. So then the next round, you get to build from those ones. And what you're trying to do is try to build out in order to connect to these big points around the outside of the board. So you are trying to, depending on what you're trying to reach, the name of them are, I forget what they're called. There's these big towers that you're trying to reach that you want to get. And the sooner you get them, of course, the more points you get. You also have, every round you'll get to pull out these special terrain cards that you get to choose from. And it's like, you'll get to put like 5 or 6 cubes on an area. And every time that one is drawn in the next rounds, you'll still get to use that card. And then you'll get a new one each round. So by the 3rd round, you're going to have 3 new ones that you'll get to do every round. So you can kind of plan from round to round, but it's so interesting. And I mean, I don't typically like games where you're putting cubes out because I can't stand little cubes because I want them to be things that they actually are. But this one makes so much sense because you have to build all these routes and then they come off the board. So if you had these standing things, they would just fall over. So the cubes work perfect. It's an awesome solo game. There's all different kinds of maps that come in the game. So there's so much replayability, but it's something you should really try. And that's my number 2, Guild of Merchant Explorers.
Nice. My number 1 is probably the one that has the most unique theme as far as route building goes. So you're not really building a route. I mean, it's that mechanism. You're building a connection, but it's not a route. And that game is Watergate. And it was published in 2019 by Matthias Kramer. And this is based on the Watergate scandal. So you have the Nixon administration that's trying to stay into office, but at the same time is they're destroying documents and hiding things and hushing up a bunch of information that's been happening in order to get reelected. And then you have the other player that's playing as the journalist that are trying to uncover all of this. And it has a tug-of-war aspect to it. So you have cards that you can play that's going to move certain information towards you and move it away from you. And it moves the tokens back and forth as well. Now, the white tokens, if it ends up on your turn, it just makes you first player next round. And first player has 1 extra card, so you have a slight advantage. So it's good to have that on your side. If you have the red token on your side by the time the round ends, then the red tokens will go onto your card. So if the Nixon administration ever gets 5 of them, he's reelected and he wins the game. For the journalist, if eventually it'll start giving them special abilities that they can apply and do. And then you have the documents that you're trying to uncover. And as a journalist, you're trying to get documents linked from Nixon to one of like the whistleblower. And you've got these informants that are going to come forward and reveal what's going on. And I think you need to create 2 links in order to stop the Nixon administration. And you're trying to create this route on the cork board from Nixon kind of putting these documents down into one of the informant that's on the outside of this thing. So you're trying to create this connection. Now, if any of these documents end up on the Nixon side, however, this is a document that he's destroyed, and he'll get to put it on the board on the destroyed blackout area face up, so that he's trying to block the path you're creating. I like this game so much. It is such an interesting, unusual theme as far as a game, but it works so well, and that tug of war kind of is so, like, it feels so thematic to me in the creating these connections and trying to reveal this information and trying to hush up the information. And I like this one a lot, and that's my number one, Watergates.
Awesome. Yeah, that is such a cool 2-player game. All right, my number one is another roll and write, and that is Trails of Tucana, made by Alice Svensson and Christian Amundsen Otsby. This is made in 2019, and this is another game where you have this little map sheet, and you have 2 different sides of the map. You have a 2-round game or a 3-round game. And you can start anywhere you want, because you will flip 2 terrain cards, and so you either have water, desert, grass, or wild, I believe. And so the 2 that are flipped is what you're going to connect. So if I have a grass and desert, I have to find on my map a grass and a desert, and I just connect a line there, and that's all I do. And what you're trying to do is you have all these different villages, so it goes A, B, C, D, E, F, maybe, depending on the map size. And then you have them again on your map. So you're trying to connect an A to an A, B to an B, and so on. But you have all these other little icons on your board. So you have like books, you have these toucans, you have these little yetis, and you have 2 of each of them on the smaller one. And you're trying to connect those as well. You're trying to connect each of them to a village. And once they are connected to a village, you get to cross them off on your board. And so you have 2, say in the smaller, for the 2-round game. So you'll cross one off, and then once you connect another one to a village, you cross another one off, and then it gives you a bonus of a free line. So you can cross off any little route that is connected. So you might get to cross off something that connects all these different icons to villages, and then you'll get to cross those off. And then you get a bunch of free routes you get to build. And then you may have connected A to A. And if you're the first one, you get to grab this card in the middle that gives you big points, and you get to mark it down. And that's all you're doing, is building these routes and trying to get the most of these like icons connected to the village, trying to connect as many villages of the same letter together. And at the end of the first round, you may have only got a few things connected, but you have a whole bunch of routes started, and you only need a few things to plug in. So sometimes someone may have a whole bunch of points in the first round, but you are so close to having all these routes connected that in the second round you come back and you totally blow them out of the water. It's so neat. I learned this one on the Dice Tower cruise. Oh, nice. And this Z taught this. Was one of his favorite at the time, and I had I had the worst game ever. He probably thought, does this girl know how to play games, or what's going on? But I couldn't connect anything, and then I felt so bad because he's one of the guys that his interest is very similar to mine. Most of them, not all of them, but a lot of the games that he would review and enjoy, I pretty much know that I probably would as well. So I was so excited to play with him, and here I had like the worst game of my life, and I'm like, no, he probably thinks I'm a complete idiot. But he did get me onto this game, and I do love it. And this is actually one of Cherry's favorite roll and write. She loves this game as well. A friend of mine that we play with, but that's my number one, Trails of Tucana. I'm still searching out for the expansion. There's a fairies expansion where you get to you can connect routes on the outside somehow or something, okay. But it hasn't come to Canada yet, or to where I have found. But it's an awesome little roll and write, and yeah, that's my number one.
That sounds really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So that was all our route building. that we had picked, and there's probably tons that, you know, are out there. There's actually one by the same designer I have sitting on my shelf of shame right now called Santa Maria, and it's a route building as well that I haven't got to. I really need to get that one to the table, but there's so many that we've probably missed or have played, and, you know, if somebody mentioned it, oh, that would have been on my list, but it just didn't happen. But next week we're going to talk about our most played games of 2022. So it's going to be interesting to see what, for the fact that both you and I we don't typically play a lot of games over and over and over. So it'll be interesting to see what ones
we played this one 4 times. Yeah. That's top of the list.
Yeah, I'm not going to include my BGA games because some of those I just play over and over and over. I'm just going to include games that I've played on the table, but that'll be a fun one to listen to. But until then, where can people reach you?
Well, we do have a Discord channel now, so be sure to join us on that. We'll have the link to that below. And I've really been enjoying the Discord. Now, we're also on Instagram. So, Instagram, I'm Mel's_boardgame_mama. And then on my YouTube channel, it's Mel's Board Game. What did I just say? I'm not that anymore.
I was going to say, didn't you switch it?
Oh, my God. That's cheapers. I'm losing my mind. This is early. I'm not fully awake. So, Instagram is Mel's_boardgame_room. My YouTube channel is Mel's Board Game Room. And my Facebook page is Mel's Board Game Room. Oh, jeez. Carla, where can we find you?
I thought, well, maybe she switched it back, but no.
No, my God.
Okay, I'm on Instagram at Board Game Specialist, all one word, and I have a Facebook page called Red Deer Board Game Fanatics. All right, until next time, thank you all for listening, and have a great day.
Bye, everybody.